Hello there. Happy belated Friday Spiritual Insights with Michael Mirdad. I hope you're all doing well in your lives, and we're going to take some time to share about light beings, what are light beings, and so on. And even if you don't know what the term means or haven't heard of it before, it's kind of interesting to know God's creation. So let me explain it like this. Light beings are kind of like, it's a term we use for beings that are higher dimensional. They're not quite angelic, yet they're not quite human. So once upon a time, we're all one creation of God's. It's children collectively. So we are one, yet a collective, let's say. The children of God, when creation takes place and we decide to venture into the universe, there are three groups that refract at first. One group stays close to God, remaining really, really close to God, part of God. That's the angelic kingdom. There's another group that splinters way off into the illusion the most perpetuating fear, anger, illusion, the demonic kingdom. And then there's another group that stays sort of in between the two, and that's the human kingdom. So when God's children start off as one, they refract like this at first, and one splits way off to the illusion, the demonic kingdom, stays close to God, the angelic kingdom, and halfway into the illusion as the human beings, are the human beings. And that's why we're sort of in a place to, it's amazing because we're in a place to choose, what is reality, what's illusion. As we wake up towards reality, we're actually lifting even the darkest beings in the universe our direction. But when you look at mythology, biblical or wherever else, you're going to hear about these beings like demons and whatnot that are tormenting mankind, that are tempting mankind. That's why you hear fundamental Christians say, Satan's tempting me and so forth. It's because this kingdom is pulling on mankind, and the reason they're pulling on them is because they're trying to draw them into the trap of being, into the illusion as much as possible. They're trying to upset the cart. They're trying to upset the balance in the spiritual, hierarchies. So, in a sense, it's kind of interesting. They can pull on us, but we can also draw on them and lift them. That's why when some people, deal with energies, darker energies, entities, one of the things you often hear them doing is let's send them to the light. You'll think of doing that whether it's your deceased relative that was really hurtful or a demonic being. That's where that saying is coming from, is like, let's lift them. Let's not condemn them into the darkness. Let's lift them, okay? However, halfway between human and the darkest beings, the most caught up in the illusion, fear, hate, and all that, right in here is another group, ETs. Halfway between human and angel, another group in here, those are the light beings. So those are two other groups. There's the three main groups, and in between them, like so, ETs, light beings. So angels help mankind, but so do light beings. And then besides light beings, there's humans are right in the middle of it all. Half of us, let's just say half for the sake of it, half of us are working the light and half of us are working the dark or the illusion. Those are sleeping humans and awakening humans. See? So, but it's not an either or. It's not we're the good guys versus the bad guys. The truth is, it's all or nothing. We all started as one, we end as one. And in that, we have to bring everybody home with us. The tricky thing is to know how to say no to beings that are acting dark, whether it's relatives, partners, our own children or parents or whomever, or beings and ETs and whatever else. We have to be able to stand our ground in the light of God and say no to their attempted abuses without judging them, though. And that's sort of the tricky part. How can we do that without judging them? Well, that's a process. It's an interesting thing when it comes to setting boundaries, because there's human beings that play games around that. They argue it and they dispute it and so on. But it's kind of funny because if you see, a butterfly land on your shoulder, you might be in awe and go, wow, that's amazing. If a wasp lands, you might think right away, get it before it stings you. If it's a snake that could really hurt you, you're even stronger in your opinion about, oh my God, get away from it. So we see things as pretty and they're okay to have around us, and we see things that are not so pretty and we want them away. But a person who knows they would rather not have something sting them or bite them, they might run from it or shoo it away. All we're saying with boundaries is the same thing about people. But there's people that enable all of these abuses, let's say, instead of just seeing them objectively without hating and say, wait, hold on, husband, you're being a rattlesnake, ex-husband, you're being a rattlesnake, mom, you're being a butterfly, dad, you're being a dragon, whatever it is. Someone else, you're being a barracuda, you're being a piranha. People are beautiful or they're not beautiful, whatever. You don't have to get caught in judging, just to simply to say, I'd rather not be stung today, shoo. Keep it kind of objective. So it's the same with these kinds of beings. In any case, I want to focus on this group, light beings. Light beings can be almost as sublime and beautiful as angels themselves, but light beings are a little bit more in the universe than angels. That is to say, they're a little more dimensional, where angels are kind of multidimensional or non-dimensional. Light beings are in dimensionality. Some of them are fifth dimensional, some of them are fourth dimensional, but angels are beyond that. So it's kind of cool when you think about it, that we call on angels for help. Remember, go to God and let it assign the right guides. We don't have to be the ones to decide. Today, here's the angel I need. Today, here's the guide I need. I know people do that, and it's fine to do that. You can have good success calling up certain masters and all. I get that. But it's even better to call upon God and let it decide which masters were the best for your help today, for your needs today. That's my take. So light beings. Light beings would include things like Syrians, Arcturians. When you think of aliens or ETs, ones that are more, malevolent, malicious and malevolent, that's more like reptilian species. Zeta Reticuli and all these other places these beings have come from, some of them from Orion. But this stuff's real. It's not like I'm kind of making this up or trying to woo you, wow you. This is, stuff exists. So, there are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in all your philosophies. There are all these dimensions. There are all these beings. There's even other sub-dimensions of all that. Where are elementals and nature spirits? They're all in there somewhere. But that's another talk, and you can watch. I've already, I think, addressed that in different talks before. But here, light beings. If they're hard to believe or hard to understand, these different kinds of species or beings, try to think of it like this. On Earth, there are nice people, not so nice people. Malicious people, wonderful people. Benevolent, malevolent. Hurtful, helpful. Just on Earth. Now just imagine that it's possible that there are other worlds, other dimensions, but other worlds, other planets, other star systems. And according to the mathematics, the odds, as they say in science, the odds are, it's an impossibility for us to be the only ones. So given the number of things that are out there, stars and planets out there. So there are other beings, and some of them are humanoid, some of them are just pure like light beings. They're not even dense, but they are still in the dimensional universe. So it gets kind of intriguing, but if you feel called, if you feel like, especially if you feel a little bit non-earthly, like if you feel Earth is a bit foreign in some ways, it could be various reasons. There could be trauma and dissociation, but it could be that you're actually from another star system, for lack of a better phrase for it. It doesn't mean you've never been on Earth, but it could be that you are here for the first time, but it can also be that you are mostly having had lifetimes in other star systems. Because when we leave the Earth plane, we tend to travel to other systems and so on. But some of us create an affinity with other systems or have not been here that much. Just like when you meet somebody, you say, you from out of town? Because you can tell the way they're dressed, the way they talk, and so on. It's the same with other species. And there are other beings. If you feel an affinity to really like If you're more right-brained, you probably will feel an affinity to Arcturians, and you can look into that a little bit more. Be careful. You don't just read a book and if it says Arcturian, you take it for gospel. Some people are authentic channels and some are not. There's another one, Pleiadian. Let me say this though. Light beings, Arcturians, almost definitely are exclusively light beings. Syrians, almost exclusively light beings. And there's a few others. Venusians, which is actually beings from our Venus, but higher dimensional, so you don't see them shopping around at, Whole Foods on Venus. They're beings that live in the Venusian planet system, but they're of another dimension. So Venusians have this really light energy about them. So there's those kinds of beings. They're just really, really beautiful. There's a couple others I might name as we get going through this, but I'll just decide, how many to get into. I believe that some of you are going to really relate to, you might feel an affinity to star systems, but stars, like the North Star, Polaris, or some of these other places. Those have a really bright energy to them. The ones not so much, Zeta Reticuli, Betelgeuse, as some people pronounce it, is another one. Those kinds of systems are a little darker. Some of the Orion a little darker. One of the most confusing to deal with are the Pleiadians. Pleiadian star system has several planets and stars in its system, and the Pleiades, as you know. And some of them are more benevolent, some of them are more malevolent. But what's interesting about it is, I would bet, and so if you've studied them a little bit, I'm just going to share with you that if there are 10 books written by channeled Pleiadians coming through, individuals like you or me, channeled but Pleiadians coming through, I would say to you 80% of them are more harmful than good. So you have to kind of know which Pleiadian material feels authentic and is helpful. So, it's not just the channel is authentic or not. Sometimes they're picking up from negative Pleiadian beings. And I realize how bizarre this may sound. One week we're talking about relations or boundaries or codependence, and it sounds so earthly and normal and grounded, and all of a sudden we're talking about the Pleiades. So I understand it can sound kind of strange, but remember, the Greeks had it right when they were referring to gods and goddesses out there that are influencing mankind's evolution or involution, depending on what they were doing with us. But it is true. Some of the biblical stories, when a person says they saw God, they were just describing a meditation. But other times, when they say they saw God, they in fact did see beings from higher dimensions, angels, or sometimes star systems. Star beings, light beings. So it's kind of cool if you think about it. Tonight, at least maybe think of it as how to expand your repertoire of topics, maybe. Maybe that's what it's about. Or maybe you're just ready to fine-tune the topics and get a little bit more about light beings. So light beings, I'll just be kind of brief with this, but if you feel a strong affinity to cetaceans or whales, dolphins, then you probably also have an affinity to Syrians, because the Syrians communicate a lot with those beings, whales, dolphins. They work with them a lot, and I know how strange it all can sound, but we have various life forms, elementals, even three-dimensionals like dolphins. Beings that are of higher dimension, they don't see things linearly, so they communicate with mankind even through its animals or mineral kingdom for that matter, because it's vibrational, it's frequency. There's beings out there that are holding space for us and seeing this planet having a birth to a higher dimension. They're seeing the planet ascending because it's shifting into a higher dimension. So if we're having a symbiotic relationship, if we're living on the planet, peopling the planet, and the planet goes into a higher dimension, what's going to happen to the people living on it? Well, parts of the planet need to die so that the rest of the planet can be born again. Kind of like saying part of a forest will burn out so that it can replenish with new, healthier trees. It's the same thing. Part of the planet's going to die, and so will some of the people. in earth changes, a lot of the people are going to shift out so that they can make the transition and then come back after the earth has made its transition. So historically speaking, we've all come in and gravitated to different densities or dimensions. And you might have gravitated only to Arcturian kind of density, which is very high. But after a while, you might have said to yourself, I want to experience something else, a little lower. I want to go experience temptation to a new level. I want to experience relationship on a third dimensional level or whatever. So you end up coming in. And so there it is. It begins and we learn. But we get here, it sounds great theoretically on the other side to say, wow, it's nice. I'm a higher dimensional being. And I think I'm going to now go and experience the third dimension. As soon as you get here, it's like, oh, what was I thinking? It's a completely challenging, dense, it pulls, it tears at us, this third dimension. And, it's like, wow, it's quite a challenge. But if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. That's the cosmic song they share, We're the cosmic New York. So if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So a lot of beings will still feel gravitated towards this place. But most do not. Most stay in their own star systems. So the Syrians are quite beautiful. There's a beautiful energy to it. If ever you've seen a presence, a light in your room, a being, it could be what? It could be an angel. It could be a deceased relative or a guide of yours or whatever. But it can also be a light being. And I really, in all my years, I've really experienced a variety of things like that, different beings, different dimensions. And there's times when I've seen around me or around other people or their stories, the darker. And that is darker people that have deceased, moved on, like negative ghosts, let's call them. There's also a demonic kingdom, but there's also ET-ish kinds of people, beings. And I've known a lot of people that have struggled with them. They're the ones that do like genetic manipulation, abductions. They draw people, and do work on them. And I've heard such amazing stories, so vivid, the mind can barely fathom what some folks have experienced, the details of it. And our job is to keep anchoring the light. So just know that, I've shared this story before in a big workshop of mine, but I'll just share this. I remember a daughter of mine, my youngest daughter. She's living with her mom. This is many years ago. It must be 25 years ago. And she's living with her mom, and I'm noticing her looking different. Her light, her complexion, her energy. So I was kind of like, there's something going on. So I inquire and inquire and inquire. Finally, I'm told, well, she finally tells me, where I think her mom might not have wanted to tell me, but I think she told me, well, these, beings are coming to me at night. And I kind of already knew that. I knew what they were doing and so on. So I could tell that she was changing. Her energy and her complexion, all these things were changing. And I could tell essentially she was almost becoming anemic because something was doing blood tests on her and drawing blood. So I knew something was wrong. So I talked to her about it in a way that she could easily share it with me instead of feeling like, drilled with questions. So I finally said, okay, so what do you do about it? Well, nothing. They keep coming, and I tell them I don't want to do this, and they keep coming. I say, okay, no problem. Some of you watching could say, oh, it's probably just a dream. That's fine. But she did have this going on, and so I told her, okay, let's do this. And when she went to bed, I went to her room, and we did a prayer. The prayer was for safety and whatever, God's presence. Now, when it was done, she had this different experience the next day. So I told her, that sounds really cool. She had all these amazing stories to it. And I said, why don't you do me a favor? Can you draw it? And she drew it. And it was just amazing because what she said and what she drew, and that little, the childlike drawings, it's so cool the way they kind of depict things. But she shows the house. They were actually in an apartment, but the apartment. A picture, part of the picture was her in her window and the ship coming down to get her in her room. So that was one part of the story. Then, as she drew a few pictures, then another picture is they're approaching her, she said, But just before they could get to her body, she said an angel came into the room. And I'm saying that could be an angel or a light being, because the beings, they don't care. They're just doing God's work. So another being gets in between them and tells them, you are not permitted here anymore, because she was willing to go to God and bring in God's presence and protection. So it tells them, you're not welcome here. So this little girl draws this painting or picture of the ship leaving, and then there's this like some sort of symbol, or so it looks like almost like the door of the ship. I said, so what's that? Is that the door? She said, no, that's a symbol that's on their ship. This is a little girl. And I said, what do you mean by a symbol? She said, well, when they left, the angels put a seal, like a stamp, on their ship, which was the angelic seal, so to speak, saying, you're not permitted here anymore. So it was like it was a talisman that would say, you are not going to be welcome. You can't come back. And whether it's the child's perception, how it says it, I loved it all. And it also is something for me to share with you, that you go to God and then God brings in just the right beings. I remember when I was coming to live in Sedona, I sat with some friends and they asked me to just channel a little bit. Usually I don't do that. I'll just do it like this, teaching, but sometimes I'll let that happen. And so I said, okay, fine, and get still, close my eyes, and let things come through. And we were seeing, I was seeing very vividly and telling them about it. In Sedona, there is this constant battle of forces, light and dark, light beings and ETs. I could see it, I could feel it, I could see the ships, the different kinds of ships. And by the way, light beings don't fly like ships, like metal ships, like they don't have intergalactic Toyotas. Strangely, the three-dimensional, because they're kind of three-dimensional, the third and fourth dimensional, the grays, you call them the grays, or the malevolent ETs, their ships are, sometimes you can photograph them, they're usually kind of dense, but light beings actually move in light ships. It's really hard to explain some of these things, but they're light ships. It would be like them flying in light bulbs around the universe. Their ship is crystalline. It's multidimensional and crystalline. It can shift through dimensions with ease. The grays and the darker beings, they have to use portals to get from dimension to another, but they can move through different, when I say dimensional doorways, sorry, to get from one part of the universe to another, they use wormholes and things like that. But technically, they fly in ships, if you can believe that. So light beings have been with us since the beginning, trying to encourage us forward. And the people that are, the people that wrote the Vedas in the Far East, that wrote the Vedas and that gave us all this wisdom through the Vedas. The Vedas are like here's how to live, a way of life, how to eat, how to think, how to breathe. You know, it's a thorough manual of living that the people of India were once given. But when you ask them about it, they say, this was given by the gods, and that's light beings. Yes, sometimes angels interact and give us info, but more often, but not known, it's been light beings credited to be angels or God itself sometimes. So light beings came to them. There's an African tribe called the Dogon tribe. And the Dogon people, they say we were visited by people from Sirius. And they have ceremonies and rituals all around the movement of the stars and planets in Sirius, the Sirius system. So they knew about Sirius before we could see it with a telescope. And they were dancing dances that replicated the movements of the stars, Sirius A, Sirius B, and so on. So there are groups on this planet that are clear about this. If I sound a little out there, not a problem. Then with tossing me out, throw away all these cultures as well that strangely made up these stories. For example, the Hopi people. Before there were the Hopi, which became Apache, Navajo, and all these other tribes, the Hopi people say that just before them there were the Anasazi. And they disappeared 1,000 years ago, but disappeared where? So you ask, and the Hopi say, we're not direct descendants of the Anasazi. We're sort of a blend here and there, but the Anasazi were their own race. And they were taller, lighter skinned, not looking native-like. So then who were the Anasazi? Where did they go? Did they become This tribe? No. They say no. Did they become that tribe? No. Then where did the Anasazi go? And the Hopi people say beings from another planet came and took them in a good way. Came and they ascended. They went to higher dimensionality. I think it's quite beautiful. The Mayans are said by some other cultures to have partly interacted with beings, light beings from other dimensions, which I think is fantastic. So think about this. There are stories in Europe, Britain, and here and there about beings from other dimensions or other places coming. Even in China, there's a story of benevolent beings coming to this planet, sometimes a little bit denser, sometimes made more of light, and interacting and guiding the emperor and so on. You're going to see some of these things on your History Channel and so forth, but that also gets very weird and conspiratorial, and it's also kept to very limited, even though it's sometimes really cool stuff they play. Sometimes it's really to the benefit of, or goal of the people watching, or lecturing or teaching on the show. When you watch like Ancient Aliens or something like that, I think they call it. Those are people who are trying to teach and get something specific out of their teaching. They want you to go and believe what they're teaching. But what's worse is they only believe in aliens. So because they don't believe in angels or God, they make everything aliens. It's like, if you say, I started eating Wheaties this week, they'll say, oh, that was an alien. Aliens, for some reason, love Wheaties, so they're controlling you. So it gets really ridiculous at times. You'll have to forgive in the background. You might hear some music because we have a concert going on here at Unity. I'm sitting at Unity today. So in any case, as I start to wrap up, how can this apply? First, just in your knowing and understanding there's such a thing, light beings, and let that add to your repertoire of knowledge. Angels, light beings, humans, ETs, the demonic kingdom. So just understand that all exists. And it's quite cool because, a lot of times cultures, when you see Native Americans, there's a symbol, a very common symbol of, it's often a woman, but it can be a male too, with its back to you when you're looking at the picture, with its arms outstretched like this, because they were interacting with beings from other dimensions. A lot of times that's the symbol of Orion, that they're interacting with some of the beings from Orion. And if they were having positive experience, it's probably the positive, because Orion has both a little bit of each. Pleiadians have a little bit of each, but Orion is an amazing place because as a star system, Orion is sort of shaped like two pyramids. Let's pretend these are two pyramids, and they're interlocked. The tips of the pyramids, triangles, are interlocked. And that interlocked section right there is called the gateway from higher parts of the universe and dimension and frequencies. Those go through that gateway called the gateway of 1111. The energies come to Earth through the Orion portal. So if you have some beings of a light nature, some beings of a dark nature, competing for control of that gateway, just like in military, they used to fight for, still do, for control of a certain waterway, right? It's the same thing, or a passageway through a certain part of a land mass. So that's what happens. The beings, higher dimensional beings, sometimes are doing what they can to keep that darker energy from taking control and affecting the energies that come to Earth. But to a degree, they can only do what we're also choosing. So if we're allowing ourselves to get very corrupted in consciousness, to a degree, we're sending that out there. It's okay for dark energies to come because we're in a dark mood. That shifts the energy in Orion, and in a sense, you could say the light beings have to step back a notch, and the other steps up a notch, and those energies start coming that direction with that particular frequency. So keep these things in mind, because when you're studying, but also when you're praying, be open. Just ask God, I'm open, and know that ascended masters might come to you, guides that were on Earth and passed over and became light-like, very light in their energy, but also guys, light beings. So just think about it. If you're drawn to it, check it out. Study a little bit about Arcturians. Generally, the information out on Arcturians is pretty cool. A lady I worked with a couple of times, Milanovic, she wrote We the Arcturians. That's got a pretty good depiction of the vibe. that beings have affected humanity. You look at some of the words, like the words Arcturian and Arthurian. You know that the Arthurian Knights and the Arthurian period was, in a sense, partly guided by the Arcturians. Just the resonance of the name tells you something. I know there's a person with the name Arthur, but I'm saying there's a resonance. So those things come together. You might feel that affinity to dolphins, whales, and think it's just about them. It could also be very Syrian oriented. If you're into Lemuria as an ancient civilization, that's very Arcturian. But Syrians can be sometimes very Atlantean, because Atlantis had its pros and cons too. So just keep these things in mind. See what you're drawn to, and maybe check it out a little more. I can say to you that most of the most popular Pleiadian stuff I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot Pleiadian. I wouldn't, because most of it is either not authentic or is authentic, but channeling the darker aspects of the Pleiadians. They're controlling and manipulative. They themselves, in their channelings, have said, we're the ones that have most negatively affected genetics of mankind. They admit that. I remember a great author on the Pleiadian material was Janie King. I worked with her several times at conferences and so forth, and I really could feel her energy was right. She wrote the Ptah, Ptaah, the Ptah tapes, and it was beautiful. You could tell it was authentic, and you know that something's real, meaning of the light, when you read it and it's so clear and it's God-centered and it's loving and it's inspiring. There's ways you can tell. When it starts acting a little funky, a little squirrely, like some of the other Pleiadian teachers, give it a break, man. Give it a rest. These people, some of them, they get conspiratorial. We're the Pleiadians, and we're warning you about this, and we're warning you about, and look out for this, and look out for that. Hate men, hate women, hate. It's so gross. It's just ridiculous. You just kiss it goodbye, walk away, don't feed it. So stay with what you can with light. Light beings, light angels, light workers, like people. Stay in the light. And remember, as you stay in the light, you're drawing other people with you, and that's what the light beings are doing. They're sending frequency to try to bring humans up to the light. Well, we have work to do too. Bringing sleeping humans, and even darker than that, to the light. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't go start looking for caves where there's dark beings to bring to ascension or light. Just be your light as much as possible. And when you see anything to the contrary, steer clear and know your boundaries. Know, here's where I'm at. I'm here for light. Would you like the light or not? People, beings, whatever, that say no, walk away. That's why you can say, if you have beings come into your room at night and you sense them, you can really clearly say, if you're here to serve the light of God or the light of Christ, you're welcome. Then what do you have to say? If you're not here to serve the light, adios. You have no place here. Say it with conviction. Say it with clarity. Believe in what you're saying, because you have every right to make that claim and that request. Okay? I pray this has made sense. It sort of came up from outer space, this talk. But I pray it's made sense. A couple of you here and there I've noticed asking about what are light beings, or is it true that other things exist? And yes, it's all part of the whole ecosystem of species and beings and dimensions and consciousness. And these various beings, they have their place, just like you and I have our place. What matters is the light. Alrighty?